Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Monday Nights with Nebraska and Kansas. My name's Tony Adams. On behalf on the Kansas Auto Body Association, we'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's program with Jake and Aztec. As a reminder, everybody's in and on mute, so please use the questions and chat panel and send your stuff in, and my friend James and I will make sure and get your questions answered. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend James Rodas with Nebraska.
Well, thank you, Tony. And as Tony said, we have Jake from Aztec on today, so you know it's going to be a good night. Jake always does a fine job. Before we get started real quick, I do want to give everybody an update on our legislation. I've been getting lots of text and instant messages and everything. We are expected to make it out of committee this week, which is a pretty huge thing to be able to say we did that in our first year. So everybody keep fighting, and we're going to keep doing our best and try to get some legislation passed. So with that, Mr. Rodenroth, I know you are ready to blow our minds, so take it away, my friend.
Man, no pressure. I'll do my best. All right, let's see what we got here. So the way I've kind of set up this evening, I've got some PowerPoint stuff that I'm going to share. I'm going to try to go through that as quickly as possible. I'm actually sitting in our calibration center here in Dallas, Texas. And I've actually got a brand new Nissan Rogue that's actually connected. If you look in the attendees list, his name is 21 Rogue. So he's in the meeting as well. And so we'll show you some diagnostic stuff. So, you know, if you have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat. And also, I'd like to know where you're from. So if all of your, if you could put where you're from in the chat, we'll make sure that's working. And I'll go ahead and get started. All right, so just a little bit of about Aztec. A lot of people think we're a scan tool company. We're not. We're really a software company and an emerging services company. We have a couple of we've made a couple of acquisitions in the last 2 years that have kind of diversified what we do. We have a sister company called FleetGenix that does nothing but keys, for instance. We have a remote calibration arm of Aztec that does nothing but remote calibration. And we're starting to look at some other verticals as well, where there's a lot of companies that fortunately want to do business with us. Some of them do only auction type vehicles. So we're looking at a variety of different spaces. We also work really close with the OEMs. That's my job with Aztec, is kind of manage our OEM relationships and working with their certified programs. So this is where we are globally, currently operating in the US and Canada, also looking in Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. We also operate in Europe. We only do remote calibration in Europe. So we support a big glass provider out there and do remote calibration. And we have a really cool chat feature that allows us to speak in multiple languages. So when you go to Europe, that's what you've got to do. So not only our reporting, but our interaction with the technician on the other line comes across in their native language. So we're soon to get ready to launch a chat feature for the US market. For pre and post diagnostics, where you can talk to us via chat. I think you'll see a lot of communication there that's valuable when we're trying to help you repair the vehicle. And I think some of that conversation that today was held over a phone gets lost in the documentation process. So it'll be nice to capture that via chat. So we work with a lot of different companies, a lot of independent shops, which I hold near and dear to my heart. But we also work with 9 of the top 10 dealers, 9 of the top 10 MSOs. We work with the insurers to help them understand what we do. We don't talk about antitrust items with them as far as pricing and things like that. We want them to understand what this technology is and what the requirements are, and then help them identify how to work with their shops on that. So as I mentioned, we work with Enterprise. Belron's the big glass company we're out of the UK. We also work closely with Nissan North America. So this is something that if you don't hear anything else out of this presentation today, I want you to hear this one. There's a very big difference between collision repair diagnostics and mechanical diagnostics. As a technician myself, I came over from the mechanical side. I was a master technician for Mercedes-Benz, so I worked in dealerships performing warranty, service, drivability, things like that. And in the mechanical side, we're really focused on what a customer's concern is. What are they complaining about? When the vehicle comes into the mechanical shop, they're not there because they want to be. They're there because they've got they're on a maintenance schedule, like they need time for an oil change, or they've experienced some kind of defect with their vehicle. Customer states the check engine light is on. Customer states the vehicle pulls to the left. Customer states that they hear a rattle, right? So they are complaining about something very specific. I think as a technician, the one that I like the most was customer states they hear a dinner bell when they hit a speed bump. Come to find out that was a loose bolt rattling against the suspension component that was making that noise. So, when you look at it from a tooling perspective, mechanical is really focused on the concern. Their job is to identify what the cause is and what the correction is. And so that's why we see, as it relates to aftermarket scan tools, as long as those scan tools can access the concern, they work just fine in mechanical. So they're not focused on looking at the entire car like we do in collision. So when you get to collision, our job is to confirm what that vehicle is. What trim level is it? Because the trim level really designates how many features it has, how many control modules it has, and then certainly you're dealing with the newest cars in the worst shape. So you want to make sure that your tool, the OE tool, in most cases, has access to every controller that's on board the vehicle. And I'm going to show you some examples later of why that matters, because what happens is you can go through a vehicle, pre-scan a vehicle, and miss a control unit because your scan tool can't speak the language that the car and scan tool speak. And a lot of that happens with brand new vehicles. So, in collision, we're really focused on making sure that we see all the modules, we identify all the problems proactively as possible. And so that's where really we see a big gap in the tools. Now, if you had a situation where you knew what the problem was, then that's where the aftermarket tools find their place, and it's mainly on the mechanical side, not collision. So major takeaways. We're seeing that, whoops, I lost it here. Hold on one second. There we go. We're seeing that dealer groups, OEM certified shops, and strong independents continue to prove they are committed to following OEM procedures and using OEM factory scan tools. So I look at it now like this, not just scan tools, even if it was putting a quarter panel on. If you had to defend that repair, how would you do it? If you said, well, we put the quarter panel on, it was an OE quarter panel, we used this joining method, it did not call for panel adhesives, this was the cut location, and it was all identified in the service manual, this is how we did it. Same thing with scan tools and ADAS calibration for that matter. What tool was used, which one was identified in the service manual, and that's what you gotta look for. You gotta look at a repair that you can defend. Highly dependent DRP shops are trying to get by with aftermarket tools in an effort to keep costs down and win favor with insurers. All aftermarket tools tested routinely miss critical safety modules regardless of the vehicle age. So we see that the aftermarket tools don't capture everything. Like I said before, they don't see everything, every module, every DTC, every piece of functionality. So in other words, I look at it like if a shop hires us to do something, they hire us to initialize a headlight, right? Well, if that's a Mercedes, you have to use looks like a grocery scanner to scan the QR code on the bottom of the headlight to officially marry that headlight to that car. And so I'd ask you, does your aftermarket tool have that capability? So that's where you'll start seeing gaps in the coverage where it might see a DTC, but it may not be able to complete the job for you. And so that's where we, like I said, our company is really agnostic. We could have used any tool because our Aztec will talk to anything. But because we operate in the collision space, the OEM tools were the right answer. So all aftermarket tools routinely miss critical safety modules regardless of the vehicle age. The vehicle age, I've seen people say, well, we're going to scan this year vehicle with OE tools and older ones with aftermarkets. And I can see that you're going to have gaps in coverage depending on the brand. There's a huge difference between OEM versus aftermarket tools and scanning versus diagnostics. So simple scan tools aren't magic wands. They don't just fix the problem for you. Clearing the DTC didn't fix the problem. We need to figure out what the set condition is, what caused that DTC in the first place. So a little trick for you, you can take the DTC and search for it in the service manual, or if you're using a third party, like an ADAS or an equivalent, you can use that and search the DTC logic to figure out what made it trigger in the first place. In the future, as we need to itemize everything we do on an invoice, this will be important when it comes to ADAS calibration and EVs. The market value of a scan is around $50. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that going on. OEM diagnostics, whether done by the dealer, mobile vendor, or an Aztec, averages about $120. So, do a little head counter in your marketplace to see what scans are going for, and more importantly, see what tooling is being used. So, some new customers, telematics, and over-the-air updates. So you're going to see telematics and over-the-air updates explode coming in the next 5 years. Right now, most of the OEMs, with the exception of Tesla and a couple of Germans, they use their telematics to update the infotainment only. So in other words, the radio and multimedia video capability in the vehicle. So think of infotainment. That's the easiest way to think of it. So big difference between software over the air and firmware over the air. So software over the air, pretty common. Firmware over the air is not as common. See that more in Tesla vehicles and emerging EVs. So this is a picture actually of my personal truck. This was a 2020 Nissan Titan. And as you can see, I've got the factory console plugged into the vehicle. The minute I started running console, and you can see I'm about a quarter of a way done with the health check, I got an alert on my cell phone. And the alert said, hey, there's a maintenance alert with your Titan. Please see your Nissan retailer. And so this is really showing how vehicles are connected to their owners and owners are connected to their vehicles. Now, I'll tell you that new consumers, especially the generation, Generation Z, I guess it is, below millennials, they're digital natives. They're not afraid to use mobile apps in everything they do, whether it's ordering a cup of coffee or connecting to their car. And so let me show you what some of these vehicles are capable of. So here's my Titan. You can see that I've got remote access to the vehicle. I can see that there's how many miles left in the fuel tank, right? If that was an EV, it would tell me what the state of charge is and how soon I need to charge it, right? It's also showing me that the truck is currently locked. It also gives me diagnostic data. So it gives me the ability to kind of check up on you after a repair. I can also see my tire pressure. I can see where the vehicle is on a map. So in other words, I can actually set parameters around my vehicle while it's in service. Some of those might be a speed alert. So if I don't want you going over 45 miles an hour, I get a notification if you go over 45 miles an hour. Another one is the boundary alert. I can set a boundary around your shop of like a 5-mile radius or a 10-mile radius. If you go outside the boundary, I get notified. I'm going to use this one for my son when he gets to driving age. Is the curfew alert. If the truck is in motion after 7 p.m., I get notified. So this is really showing how telematic connectivity to a vehicle, how an owner could use this to benchmark whether they got a good repair or not. So they're going to start asking probing questions, maybe questions they didn't ask in the past, and you need to be aware if they're connected to these dealer type services. This is brand new. I saw this literally, this went live probably in the last month. We were in Ford Motorcraft, and when I logged into it with a VIN number, it told me that I did not have access to connected car data. And do I want to ask the owner for permission? So as you can see, Jay Velarde is actually Jason Velarde. He works with me. And I told Jason, I said, I'm going to send you a request and I need you to send me the code back, right? So I sent Jason his emails here. I told him that the business that was trying to get Aztec or get access was Aztec. So that's me. And then he sent me a code. And you can see that I've got that code, and now I have 7 days of access to his connected car data. So I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden this pops up, and it shows me how many miles he has on his truck, shows how much fuel's in his vehicle, what his tire pressure is, what his oil life is, and then any diagnostic information that had been sent back to Ford in the last 90 days, I could see that. So as you can see, he had an alert come in on the 8th, and I can look at it and see it's a lost communication failure. So this allows a dealer to actually predict maintenance, to predict when there's a problem. Here's another example. So on a 2020 Explorer, another coworker, and he did some modifications to his Explorer. I think he's got the new ST, and he put a new intercooler in the front. And you can see the cyber fingerprint. I can see all these diagnostic faults. And as a result, I can see a lot of different communication failures, lost communication with park assist. He's had the headlights out, all those kinds of things. And so a dealer is going to be aware of what you're doing to the vehicle if you don't perform diagnostics. So this is the same could be said about a shop. So if this went to an independent repair facility and they're not scanning cars, we could see that. So a lot of communication going on over connected car. So some ADAS calibration and understanding the requirement. So it seems like, I've showed this one in the past, but it still is not resonating with people. It seems like when people are confused in general, we go to YouTube. And whether it's installing a ceiling fan or how to program the remote for our TV or whatever it might be, we always go to YouTube. we don't really even look at the instructions sometimes that come with the ceiling fan. It's kind of frustrating. So the same thing could be said about ADAS calibration. As you can see, this guy's got a Honda approved step ladder there, and he's using a clipboard with a printed target. And, you know, when I looked around on Google, I could see that there's a variety of people doing this different ways. So that's a yardstick and a cinder block, couple of different ladders are being used. And then, you know, this one's got like a microphone stand, and this is the size of the factory target. So you can see it says no more than 2 inches from the floor. It also says that the position will change by wheelbase. So depending on what you're working with, that position V4 where the target's supposed to be can actually move around. And so, you know, if you're calibrating way up here, yeah, you might get it to pass, but how's it going to behave? How's the customer going to experience it, right? So those are all things that we've got to think about. So some dealers as well are facing a big challenge. You got to think about it like this. Advanced driver assist is new to everybody. Dealers, glass installers, paintless dent repair, collision repair, everybody's dealing with it for the first time. So there's, you know, when they tell you they got a lot of experience at it, I don't believe that. Even for myself, I don't believe that. I feel like we learn on every car. And you got to look at it like, you know, I don't know how to work on this car. I don't know how to take a bumper off. I don't know how to take a windshield out. And simply humble ourselves and go look those things up. And you'll be amazed what you find. So fortunately, I was really proud of this body shop. They researched how to change a bumper cover, and they found that in Honda's case, they didn't want you repairing a bumper. So as we dug into this thing, do not repair the bumper. So they put a new bumper on it. You could see the mount location for the radar was damaged. And so he decided to send this to a dealer to have it calibrated. And so if you're doing that now, how do you audit what was done? How do you look that up and say, okay, well, I'm going to check when this thing comes back from the dealer, I want to make sure they did their job. So in the procedure, it tells us that we have to hang strings and plumb bobs. I would want a photo of this. So you want to make sure that they did the angle check, right? If they simply just set the target up and hit calibrate, they didn't do it right. There's actual measuring dimensions that have to be checked on the mounting location, especially when you have damage there. So that's something you want to make sure you capture in a photo. So using the job aid, you can determine what the system is, what it's called, and how it works, right? So in this case, you're looking at the actual dealer invoice. It says that the customer, being the body shop, stated that the blind spot monitor did not work, and make sure it is working, right? So he says tested the cruise control and lane departure. So cruise control and lane departure are not blind spot. So he immediately didn't answer the customer's concern, right? So when you go through this, you want to make sure the suspension's not been modified, the tire sizes are all the same, tire pressure. So when we go through our Nissan class, we actually test you on that stuff. We want to make sure that you removed all the excess cargo. We want to make sure the tire pressures have been measured and written down on the floor so you can capture them in a photo. This also gives you an idea of what the space ought to look like. So where are they doing these calibrations? In the service lane, outside? You know, are they emptying the dealer showroom and doing them? I've seen any and all of the above. So that's something to think about when you're sending these vehicles out for calibration. So I know this one surprises absolutely everyone. Not all parts are created equally. So this is actually a photo of the room that I'm sitting in right now. And this vehicle came in and had the scan tool was giving us a false positive. It was telling us that the calibration board, and as you can see, there's the VAS numbers on there, that the calibration board was in the wrong place. So really the scan tool is giving us bad information, because if you looked at this target, and I can show it to you if you'd like to see it, it has levels and tape measures, and it goes in an exact spot. And so we started looking at it, and you see calibration could not be performed. Calibration board is at the wrong distance. So we double checked our work there, checked our measurements. And then we started looking at what were the repairs that were done to the vehicle. And we started digging through. We've seen these cameras actually installed improperly where they didn't get fully seated. We've seen these brackets, which are plastic. I've seen them both broken, and I've seen them transferred from an original windshield onto an aftermarket. And so we've also seen the connector improperly seated into the camera. Treat these cameras like headlight bulbs. Don't put your fingers on them. You don't want to touch them. When you buy them new, in fact, they come with a little piece of plastic across the front sometimes. So be really careful there. So as we dug a little further, we saw that this was a non-OEM windshield. And here's the position statement from Audi that says you have to use an OEM windshield. So, you know, you want to be careful with your aftermarket glass selection, because this can not only affect the forward lane camera, but it can also affect the heads-up display. So if it puts the miles per hour or the navigation directions on the windshield, those can come out blurry on certain manufacturers. So be careful with that. So we actually put an OEM windshield in this vehicle and it calibrated the first time. So that's something that when you start changing the way the vehicle was designed, whether it be parts or you didn't measure the car, you got to remember that service manuals are written on perfect vehicles, not vehicles that have been repaired or vehicles that have had non-OEM parts fitted to them. So when you do those things, you create variables for yourself and you could create calibration failures. So this is a Nissan Rogue. I actually have one of these sitting behind me that we just did a radar calibration on today. And this just kind of illustrates what the process is. This is the factory tooling. It's actually a tier 1 provider called Hunter. Same people that make the alignment machine, they make all of the factory tooling for radar for Nissan. In the service manual, just like an alignment spec, you want that horizontal and vertical axis to be between plus or minus 3 degrees. Don't assume that you know that for a Nissan Rogue, that's all Nissans. We've seen some Infinitis go down to 2.5. We've seen some go up to 4. So you want to look at that on every platform that you work on, not just the Rogue. So as you can see, on this vehicle, we're sitting at 10.75 and we should be at plus or minus 3 degrees. This is a look at the radar on the front. And when you look at a side profile, you can see it's dipping down a little bit. And as you can see from the Body Shop with Love, a little bit of tape, a little bit of compound there, right? We can tell it came from them. There's a little bit of damage on the back side of the radar where it struck the vertical support. This was enough to create about $800 worth of severity. So this is a new radar and we had to recalibrate the vehicle. And so this is stuff that can create pitfalls for you when you start calibrating vehicles. Now, if you're a body shop that's going to do calibration in-house, you have a little bit better control of the quality that comes in and out of your calibration center. But as you bring in outside companies, whether it's glass providers or other body shops or fleet accounts or whatever it might be, you can see the repair quality move all over the place. Where we can have literally the same car come in, one car takes 2 hours to do, no problem, and then the next one takes 5, and it's the same car. So it really comes down to how well was the vehicle repaired. I can't really cut it any other way. So once we made the corrective repairs, replaced the radar bracket and camera together, or I'm sorry, the radar and radar bracket together, you can see that now our specs are within tolerance. So those are the kinds of things that we want to look for. We want to find this as proactively as possible so that we keep vehicles that need to be repaired, and tow the ones out that don't need to be repaired. This is just an itemized of what our billing looks like. I won't share the dollars with you, but I just want you to see the documentation. You need to, if you get a failed calibration, you need to document that it did fail, and then you need to show that it passed, right? So what corrective repairs did you do to make it pass? So this is not something you want to come back and haunt you. You can see we put the fuel receipt in there as well. That's guaranteed fight from an insurer, so make sure you document accordingly on that. Unfortunately, there's not a weight that we can simulate fuel with, at least not today, there's not. So we do have to fill the vehicles with fuel, and it does have an effect on a good or bad calibration. So as you head back to your shops this week, start thinking about how many alignments do you do a week. And bigger shops obviously are going to do a lot more than smaller shops, but even the ones that are doing 2 and 3 a week, start researching how to do an alignment. Pretend you don't know it, because you will be absolutely surprised. So here's Ford. This was on a Fusion. As you can see, the alignment, the 4-wheel alignment, and it walks me through the entire process. But it says, hey, by the way, if you're equipped with a lane departure camera, a lane camera alignment is required as well. Use the scan tool to perform it. So this is not only a missed opportunity to collect revenue, but it's also a potential problem for the consumer when they pick it up. This is a look at a Subaru. So as you can see, suspension alignment. If you're doing an alignment and it's equipped with EyeSight, they want you to do an EyeSight calibration as well. So you're going to find this across a couple different brands, and just make sure you're not surprised by it, and it'll absolutely justify why you needed to do it in the first place. So a little bit of history here. I don't know how many people talk about, and there's a lot of people talking about ADAS. There's a lot of people presenting about it. I try my best to give you a little different spin than everybody else. My father was a professional race car driver, and so I grew up in motorsports, literally 80 miles from Daytona, and running the racetrack with Dad. And so when you think about where does ADAS and emerging technology in general, where does it come from? Well, when you think about in a racing environment, and maybe not so much NASCAR, even though some NASCAR has some stuff, but other stuff like sports car racing, motorcycle racing, where does the technology come from? So if you look at, this is the Cadillac DPI, and it's capable of over 200 miles an hour on the high bank of Daytona. So it shares the racetrack with the new Corvette. And so the new Corvette, being mid-engine, can't see this vehicle approaching 30 miles an hour faster than it's going. And the Corvette's not going slow either. It's doing about 180. So how does it do that? When you're wearing a helmet and you have a 6-point harness on and a roll cage around you and you can't see, how does it know this vehicle's coming up on it, and how does it not hit it? So I'm going to show you a video. Before I do, a little blast from the past there. There's me and Dad doing some amateur sports car racing at Road Atlanta. The very next year, he got the ride professional and ran some professional racing. So this is why I'm such a gearhead. Just grew up around race cars. So here's a look at the C8 Corvette. Something kind of cool about the C8, it was actually co-developed next to the road car, so that when the road car launched, they immediately could start racing it. And you can see on the C8, no back glass. And when you look at the dash, you can see you've got the instruments here, and then you've got a little TV screen. So this vehicle uses a combination of radar and camera to track vehicles that are behind it. So I'm going to show you a short video on how that works. I don't think there's any audio here, so I'll just walk you through it. So this is at Sebring. You've got a prototype on you. As you can see, it changes colors as he approaches. So as he accelerates, and it indicates what side he's going to pass on, right? And you can see the prototype behind him is flashing the headlights, hoping you'll see him. Well, the radar let him know he was there, right? My understanding is it can track up to 30 vehicles at one time. And you see the green means he's accelerating, yellow means he's going closer, now he's getting closer, turning red, and it just lets the driver, it gives them a little visual that you got somebody coming up on you. It also works in rain or in night conditions. So as you can see, very poor visibility out of the camera, but yet the radar is still functioning as designed and lets him know he's going to get past, right? So here's the headlights at night, so you get the blur. Now, right now, this is probably very consuming or very confusing to a consumer, but I would imagine it's a matter of time before they work this technology into something that's easier to understand for an everyday driver. But for a race car driver, this is a huge help because they don't have to turn their head. They can literally look at a screen and see the vehicles around them using camera and radar. So very cool stuff. You know, and when you're on the track in the heat of the moment chasing somebody, you know, it's very physically demanding and you can fatigue very quickly. So being able to save energy like this and be able to watch what's going on around you is a good thing. I think it's got one more thing to show you here. All right, so there you go. So like I said, it continues today because now the big talk beyond ADAS is EV and advanced propulsion systems. So this is the platform that Porsche used 3 years in a row to win the championship at Le Mans. Those of you that have watched Ford versus Ferrari may know what that movie is. Pretty amazing piece of engineering. So this vehicle is a little over 900 horsepower combined with its gas drivetrain and its electric drivetrain. And something interesting here is this is a water-cooled battery next to the driver. Notice the size, pretty small, right? This is the MGU or motor generator unit on the front of the front axle. Represents about 485 horsepower electric motor. And typical of an electric vehicle is it recovers electrical power under braking. That's pretty common in street cars as well. What's not common in street cars is the ability to generate electricity off of a turbocharger. So as the vehicle spools and accelerates, it actually builds electricity as well. So it doesn't waste the exhaust coming out. So matter of time before I think we could see this. Porsche is one of the big proponents of, you know, while they do have an electric vehicle platform in the Taycan, they're also working on a combustible fuel that is clean, and they're doing that with Exxon. So if you think about it, you know, Porsche owners are kind of unique. So it's something that, you know, I think that hurts their brand if they go full electric on everything. So they're looking at a lot of different options. So this is the Volkswagen IDR. Volkswagen has a whole new lineup of electric vehicles that start with ID, the first being the ID3 and the ID4. This is the IDR. So this is the fastest vehicle to go up Pikes Peak, whether electric, gas, diesel, doesn't matter, it has the fastest lap time. You're looking at a very high-tech air conditioning system that they use to recharge the battery pack. So very cool technology. You can see in a racing platform where money is no object, they try a lot of different things. So with the EV stuff brings us a whole new list of tech companies that maybe some of them you've never heard of before. So we'll talk a little bit about those. But before I do, let's talk about the differences between ICE and EV. So on the left, you have the diesel powertrain that Audi won a couple championships with, and now you're looking at their electric platform, the e-tron drivetrain. So as you can see, fewer parts and simpler in design, but every bit is amount of engineering went into that as well. So automakers have committed to an all-electric future on some levels they have. So you can see everybody is kind of working on at least an electric platform and maybe a hybrid platform. And they're all kind of in different spots as far as when they think they'll go full electric. And this is just a graph that kind of illustrates that. Some of the pros and cons of ICE vehicles versus battery electric vehicles, just showing internal combustion engines versus one or more electric motors. I think what it means to us in collision, you're going to see a lot of scan tool supported parts. So in other words, steering systems, braking systems, cooling systems may require scan tools to install them. So that's where we need to humble ourselves and say, well, we need to put a radiator in this car and a core support. Great. Research the core support, make sure you get the body structure stuff right, and then research how to change the radiator so you know what's involved. And if it's scan tool that's involved, make sure you have the capability in-house or you plan for it at the tail end of the repair. So those are the kinds of things moving forward that we're going to have to be very aware of. So EVs will disrupt our future. OE factories and suppliers will change dramatically. We're going to have a whole bunch of new manufacturers, which I'll show you here in a minute. The dealer service volume will decline because it's less moving parts, less wear and tear, not as much oil and fluids and things like that, and a lot of enhanced electronics. So some new OEMs. Some of you maybe heard of Fisker. Certainly everybody's heard of Tesla. Some new players, Rivian and Lucid. How about all of these guys? So Mahindra, Faraday Future, DS Automobiles, Bollinger Vehicles, NIO, SF Motors. If you like to play in the stock market, I recommend looking at these companies. They're going to be big players. Mahindra is the largest tractor manufacturer in Europe, or I'm sorry, in India, and they have an electric vehicle platform. As you can see, they participate in the US in the Formula E series. And like I said, they're really taking it to the mainstream car companies like BMW, Audi, and Porsche. And they're playing by a different set of rules. Venturi currently owns the fastest electric vehicle in the world, with it reaching 341 miles an hour, fully electric drivetrain, multiple battery packs, multiple electric motors. So as you can see, the skill set is there to build some pretty impressive vehicles, and it'll be interesting to see how they enter the marketplace. And it may not be through things like dealerships. It might be directly to consumer. It might be over a mobile app. I think we could all be surprised on how they could do things. So Rivian is maybe a company you've heard of. They're backed by Amazon. They're building the new Rivian Prime vehicle. So those of you that have considered maybe joining repairing a fleet, or maybe you already do like Enterprise, the Rivian RPVs are going to be interesting. And something they're building 3 different classes of this truck, different sizes, and based the size of the city, the size of the route will kind of determine what truck runs what route. But very interesting. And say they're already using these in Colorado, and they're starting to scale them across the country. This is Rivian's pickup truck. One of my friends, Frank Phillips, works at Rivian, and he made a very interesting comment that I wanted to capture here. He said, Jake, we will very likely be very different than any other OEM you work with a fierce focus on the customer experience. And it really kind of echoes what Amazon says. They want to be different than everybody else, and they want their customers to have an experience. If you think about what really makes people angry about their vehicles, it's buying them and fixing them. I can tell you that I'm not happy with the OEM that I own currently, that my wife drives. And I'll tell you, it's just something that really frustrates you when you spend a lot of money on a car and you don't hear from anybody in a month. That's not good. And so new tech companies are going to make everybody perform better, I think. So did you ever think you would see a camp kitchen built into the side of a pickup truck? Well, there you go. There's Rivian's pickup truck. It has a portable kitchen that has a working stove, an induction cooktop, a 4-gallon water tank and pump, $5,000 option. So if you could buy a Rivian, get a camp kitchen. I think that's pretty cool. So they're going to also offer a variety of things that are different than other OEMs. They're also going to play in different arenas than some OEMs. Rivian, very similar to Tesla, is considering their own insurance. So that's where some of you that may be considering certification, you may want to look at that as it relates to working with an OEM insurer. So as I wrap this thing up, another couple things that I've experienced in the past that I think are very cool, virtual reality and augmented reality, I really think will change the way our trade is trained and what the repair procedures will look like. I think repair procedures really are about who reads them, because you could give 5 technicians the same repair procedure and they may give you 5 different answers. So having connectivity to that technician as they're servicing the vehicle is what augmented reality is all about. So as you can see, I'm wearing the headset there. I can look at a vehicle and determine what its substrates are. So show me the aluminum, show me the high strength steel, show me where the high voltage cables are on this vehicle. So very cool stuff and very intuitive. So hopefully this makes some impact in the future. So my last slide here, scanning and calibrations course for the Nissan Certified Collision Network is available. We're actually teaching this out of Jacksonville. You guys be sure to ask James. He went through this himself. He can tell you it wasn't easy. So we're currently taking classes, and anybody who's interested that's Nissan certified, please sign up. We are going to open this up to non-certified shops at some point, and that's coming in the future. So Tony, you want to take some questions before we jump to the Rogue? Do we have any?
Well, while we have people send their questions up, I got a couple for you, Jake.
Sure. Okay, go ahead.
So alignments, we just can't have them in spec anymore. They need to be tighter than they used to be because of all the ADAS stuff, correct?
Yeah, I would say within specification is the right answer, because you're going to have things that contribute to that. Suspension wear, tire wear, that kind of stuff. They're not going to always be factory fresh for their whole life. So I would say as long as you're in spec, then you should be good.
Do you see that? Go ahead.
There's some tolerance with the radar stuff too. Remember, plus or minus 3 degrees, So, we try to get that as centered as possible, but I think OEMs engineer these things knowing that they're going to wear, and tires are going to wear, suspensions are going to settle, those kinds of things.
So we talked a lot about the OEM stuff, and just so everybody knows, I called Jake the other day for a friend of mine not in the area that had an aftermarket OEM calibration done on his windshield, and as he's driving down the road, the mitigation braking hits now. So you got to go factory. I know a lot of people are looking at aftermarket tools because they want to try and capture that money. Personally, too much liability. You need to go with factory, and that's the only one that does it correctly, correct?
Yeah, my recommendation is start with one brand. Pick the top brand that's in your shop that you see the most of, or maybe it's the top 3 brands, and then just invest in the tooling for those cars. I understand wanting to capture the revenue. I totally get that. Having a little bit more control of where it goes and when it comes back and all that stuff. I totally get it. I would focus on a brand by brand basis. Start with one, then add another, then another. And you're going to see some similarities as far as the way they're prepped and things like that. But there's going to be some things that are unique to that platform that might even come across a little bit weird. Some of the stuff is strange. But I think that's the best way to handle it. That way you don't overwhelm your employees. And like I said, you got more control of what the output's going to be as far as quality.
Documentation. I know you guys do a very good job documenting things. If you're going to have an outside company do it, make sure that you are getting proof that the work was done correctly. The procedure, in-process photo showing the car loaded properly or unloaded properly, full tank of gas, things like that. You still there? I think we might have lost Jake.
I think we might have lost Jake.
I'm here.
All right,
Sorry.
we lost your video.
I thought my key turned off. I want to make sure it didn't. So
So documentation, proof of work, more important than ever, especially on this stuff. And again, other people, please get your questions in for Jake.
Yeah, Jake, on the documentation, side of things, right? Before we started tonight, you were showing us your technician's drawer of strings, right?
Yeah.
Of all the stuff that they have, and you look at some of the aftermarket tools, right, that have got lasers and stuff like that. But I think you had touched on it pretty early on tonight when you talk about defending it, right? Like you're going to have to go to court. Can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's you want to build a repair plan that you can defend. If you didn't use, factory SSTs, which stands for special service tools, and each one of them has a number. A lot of them have a part number, whether it's a typical part number that you see in a parts department at a dealership, or they may have a tool number. You want to make sure you can call those out. So if it's a Nissan, you know that the camera targets start with a J. They're a J 2535 or whatever the number is, and make sure you can identify that was the tool that was used. It's not one that you got from, page 6 of one of the trade magazines, because I look at it like, while those tools are very well made, a lot of them are aluminum and metal, and they use lasers for centering. They use some cool stuff, but are they approved by anybody? And do they have a service number or a tool number with an OEM? Because at the end of the day, we hold the liability on it, and we've got to be able to defend what the repair was, right? So it's kind of like using any frame bench you want or any welder you want, right? You can't do that. You want to make sure you're using the correct tools for that vehicle.
Alignments. I know this is something that everybody needs to work on, ourselves included. That we should be doing a lot more alignments than what we're doing now. And sometimes you may have to do 2 of them through this process just to make sure that you are doing everything correctly, correct?
James, can you see my camera?
Yes, can now.
So when we started this facility in January of 18, this alignment machine was not here. We were relying on an outside party to do our alignments. And the unfortunate thing about people that do alignments, and not all of them, but there's a lot of them out there because I've encountered them myself, is it seems like the printer is always broken, or the guy that does the alignments is gone to lunch, or whatever it is. And we couldn't get good documentation out of our third party. And I'm not going to say that everybody's like that, but there's some of them out there that they don't calibrate their machines, they don't maintain them, they don't keep the software updates. And so we made the very expensive decision to bring the alignments in-house so that we could control that part of it a little bit better. But this facility does nothing but calibration. So it makes sense in our case. I'm not sure it makes sense for a small shop to do that. Maybe a bigger shop that has more vehicles per month or something like that, it would make sense. But as I walk you down the line here, you can see the brands above the targeting systems. This is all factory targeting, broken down by OE, all the way down. And so I would never tell you to buy this. It does not, there's not enough an ROI at this point. I really don't believe you can capture enough vehicles to make this pencil because it's a lot of money. This is one of the few facilities that we have that actually has the full Volkswagen Audi setup, which is another reason why we got the alignment machine. So as you can see, there's the VAS setup right there. I think I showed that in one of my slides, but the other thing is the lighting we can fully control. So we can bring it down. There's certain OEMs that don't want it too bright. There's some that want their targets lit up. This floor, let me zoom in on this for you.
That's right, Kansas.
Nice.
I missed Kansas. I'm sorry, Kansas. I totally forgot. But this is something where you can write on the floor your wheel height measurements and your tire pressure and all that stuff. And guys, we have the aftermarket stuff in here too, because we want to see how far along are they getting? Are they getting better? Right? The results, are they repeatable? Do they change the repair procedures? Do they change the target size? You know, I mean, so we look at what they're doing too, just to see, does one of them have a chance with an OEM at some point? Today, that's not the case, but maybe one day it will be. And so that's why we're trying to understand what they do as well. So, I feel like in this room, we've got it. If they make it, we've got it. So, was there any questions on this stuff?
Yeah, we got one. Are lifted or lowered vehicles able to be calibrated?
Great question. Great question. I actually had that in the PowerPoint. I took it out because I was like, man, this is already too long. So yes and no. And the no part of it is how far modified are they? Certain OEMs will allow a little bit of a lift kit. Certain OEMs will deactivate the front radar if the customer chooses. So Toyota actually has a bulletin that says, hey, if our customer wants to lift or modify their vehicle, here's the process to permanently deactivate the front radar so the emergency braking doesn't engage, right? And you're going to have some people that don't care. They wanted a Toyota that had leather seats fully loaded and they want to lift it, right? So you're going to have some of those people. But as a best practice, I would stay away from those cars because you're going to create maybe a situation where, when you attempted to calibrate it, there was no dash light on, and then all of a sudden there was a dash light because it was modified. We've had a couple of them come through here. Specifically Ford 360 comes to mind, where it was a stolen tailgate and there was a brush guard on the front, and the brush guard wouldn't allow the front camera to see the pattern on the floor, and it kept failing. So we had to take the brush guard off. And so you may create some non-included labor operations for yourself that you have to charge for because the vehicle's been modified. Lift kits, wheels, and tires seem to be the biggest problem at this point. But there's lots of modifications out there to kind of keep your eye on.
Awesome. Hey, can you give maybe some keywords that guys can look for when they're doing their procedures for, hey, front radar or bliss or something like that they can start to look up and maybe help with their supplement process?
The best thing for them to do, because that could be quite a long list. As you remember, for the Nissan class, we had, I don't know, 20 different acronyms for all the different systems, and that was just Nissan Infinity. There's an extremely valuable tool that iCar puts out. That's the ADAS search engine. I think that's what it's called. It's in the RTS.
Yep.
What it will do is give you a generic term. It'll say front camera. And then it'll give you the advertising term that OEM calls that system. So that may help you when you're trying to search for it. So in Nissan's case, it would be, the generic term would be front radar, but Nissan calls it intelligent cruise control. So when you search for it in the manual, you want to search for ICC, and then, it might be RCTA for rear cross traffic alert, BSM for blind spot monitoring, DAST for direct adaptive steering. So as you come through the Nissan class, we actually quiz you on that stuff. James will tell you, we have a big old chart that you have to read those off. And we did
times a day
to help you in the manual. So, but the iCar website is awesome because they actually have you can search for vehicles in there. And my understanding is they started with new vehicles first and went backwards. So you should have.
I know on Ford it's behind a little bit right now. We were actually looking at it today and they don't even have 2020s in there. So I got to call in to them to see when they're going to get that updated.
I think they got one or two people working on that. So that may be why.
I got a few questions for you. Do you plan to add the Bosch DAS 3000 to the aftermarket static fixture collection?
Oh, I didn't show you that one. It's over here. Hang on. Can you guys still see me?
Yep.
Let's see here. This room is about 4,500 square feet. Those of you may ask. You mean that one?
There you go. I'm guessing. I see Bosch.
Yep.
Hopefully that answered your question, Carl. You going to be rolling out any newer tools or any more functionality to help shops with calibrations in the future?
Yes, and yes. We have the Gen 3 Aztek's been under development for the last year and a half. What I know about it is it'll have a color screen on the front. It'll be smaller. We'll be able to capture some of the DOIP vehicles, the diagnostics over internet protocol vehicles. Just a lot of enhancements in general, but yeah, that one's underway. We're currently doing some remote calibration for select customers. We don't just turn that loose for anybody. We want to make sure they know what they're doing. And because really, I mean, as it comes to calibration, the bulk of the job is on your end, not mine. So we want to make sure that you've got the vehicle prepped, that you use the correct targeting systems, all that kind of stuff. So
one more question before you get to your Rogue. How do you address vehicles with larger wheels and tires? Would you still try and calibrate them, or would you turn them down?
I would move to the next vehicle. That's my personal opinion. I think that you open yourself a can of worms. That's kind of like if it's candy painted and you got to blend the fender and make it match. Do you fix that car or do you move on to the next one? You know? I think there's a lot of cars out there to fix. I'd move on. I just think you're going to create an issue, honestly. Let the guy who modified it calibrate it.
Yep.
So on 360 or lane departure, if there's not a mill light on the dash, but you unplugged it,
yep,
95% of the time you're recalibrating that bad boy, correct?
So you need to look at, that's a very loaded question that you can't cover all brands with. So I would look at it for that brand, for that system, what do you need to do? I think a good example is this Rogue I'm about to show you. The Nissan vehicles in general were on the rear radar were plug and play, fairly simple. Unless you had to replace them, there was an additional step for that. But on the Rogue, it is a dynamic calibrated radar. So you have to make sure you get the test drive done, and it shows a 0 to 100 complete status on both sides. And so you also have to make sure that you're running the correct version of console or it won't pass. And so that's something that's different. So that's, like I said, you can't assume because you've done Nissans forever that you have every Nissan or every Honda or every Ford because they change things pretty frequently. So
we're just getting a lot of people saying, well, there's nothing on the dash. The
yeah,
moral is you still got to go and look everything up.
You can't, you got a dash light for Bluetooth either, but you unplug the microphone, I guarantee it won't work. So making sure that you run the diagnostics properly to make sure that you're not missing anything. There's even some ADAS systems that won't set a DTC, so you need to look at the labor operation to determine if it's required. So in other words, four-wheel alignments, bumper repairs, quarter panel repair or replace, windshield changes, interior trim that are associated with cameras, like, you know, eyesight vehicles have the cameras built into the headliner. You know, the list goes on and on. So, you know, focus on what you're doing from a body shop standpoint. When we get those cars here in the calibration center, there's a standing law around here that we collect the latest and greatest repair order from the body shop to determine everything they did to this car. Because it may come in for a 360 cam calibration, but we saw they did front bumper work and it needs a radar too. So that's where you want to make sure you're capturing the trim level of the car and everything that's been done labor operation wise, so you don't miss anything. I think that's, you know, that's something, that's why we bought ADAS Think to help our shops figure that stuff out.
I did forget you guys bought that.
We did.
My next question was going to be on a Mazda. How do you tell what it has without plugging in?
So that's a good question. So number one, remember that when a OE wants to sell you the lowest trim level, and they're trying to convince you to buy the highest one, they got to convince a consumer to spend $7,000 to $10,000 on the high trim level. Follow me? So They'll tell you the difference. They'll say, well, the S model has all of these systems, but the Platinum will have all of these systems. So using the OE sites is a good way to do it as well. But without connecting to it, it becomes tougher. And you can look for supporting hardware within the car. So look for disable switches, both in the infotainment, on the dash. Electric brake calipers are another good indicator of a high trim level. So Nissan Platinums and SVs that have ProPilot have electric brake calipers, where the cheaper models do not. They have a traditional pedal or a pull electric or a pull emergency brake. So I know that's like a loaded response there, but you can't diagnose every vehicle the same way. You've got to look at it. What am I working on today? What trim level? That kind of thing. So
In class, we talked about ProPilot 3.0. Can you expand on that? What we expect to see from that?
yeah, so ProPilot 2.0 will be very similar to GM's Super Cruise, where it's a geo-fenced system. So in other words, those of you that are doing test drives and capturing the test drive, make sure it includes a highway. And I don't know what's out there in Nebraska. Help me out here, James. What's the major highway out there?
Well, we got Interstate 80. It's
So
a big state. We got highways everywhere.
So you want to make sure that system's not even going to turn on until it sees you on Interstate 80. So make sure you do your test drives on an approved highway. So it also has the some semi-autonomous park capability where it'll pull itself out of a parking garage or out of a parking spot or out of a garage. It has driver assist where it can detect drowsiness. It can take turns on an interstate where ProPilot 1.0 wouldn't do that. So some subtle changes, but some similarities as well. You have to make the Nissan a presenter, James.
I'm trying to find it on here.
Nissan Rogue.
Done.
Okay, cool. So what I've done here, the Nissan Rogue, if you look at my camera in the back, can you guys see my camera still or no? It's back there flashing.
Yeah.
Back there flashing. So it's connected to the factory scan tool console. And this is what the actual scan tool looks like. And this is a rental car that has a story to tell us. We can see that the parking sensors have had errors in them in the past. And so I'm going to quiz James here. James, what does yellow mean? Remember yellow and red?
Passcode.
Yeah, and red is current, right? So this is what we look for when we're doing scans. FFD stands for freeze frame data. This vehicle has roughly 5,000 miles on it. And we can see the mileage count on this one is at 5419. So this is one that's been fairly recent. So I would, as a diagnostics guy, I would go and look at this vehicle in the back and see if it's been hit, see if the bumper's been changed, see if there's any repairs to the rear body panel, the lift gate, that kind of thing. Look for those telltale items, the runs in the paint, the trash, that kind of stuff. Because these faults, it's interesting that they're there, and the timestamp in which they're there. We can also see some communication faults. A lot of times that U for communication could be battery voltage related. So we've got a power supply issue up here as well. So, you can go into Nissan's tech info and search for these DTCs individually. I recommend doing that and putting those lines on the estimate. That will help justify what you're looking for and why you spent time on it, right? And it'll help justify the diagnostics to a third-party payer. So this vehicle also has what we call a central gateway, which is basically a digital padlock on the vehicle. Only factory software, the console, works on this car. So aftermarket software will not work on this vehicle, and at least certain portions of it. So when you go into the front radar systems, for instance, we go over here. I'll show you the side radar. So here's the rear radars right here, left and right. Another one to watch out for this is if that vehicle's struck in the quarter panel and the connector is damaged or the wiring is damaged, you may not see this populate on the scan, okay? So certainly if you see a left and there's no right, that's a problem. And there may not be a DTC for that. So what happens is the ground circuit left or right determines what side the radar is on the vehicle. So you want to watch that carefully. So if you've got somebody repairing the connector or the harness, make sure they pin it correctly or you could have a problem. So when you go into this one, remember I told you this one's a dynamic calibrated. You can see CGW is currently locked. If you see the red dot, it is currently locked and will not allow me to calibrate this module without unlocking it. So even if you've got a factory scan tool, but it's not up to date, if it's not registered with Nissan's tech info, it will not open the gateway. And so just show you what that looks like. You can see there's certain things, this work support piece is restricted and will allow me to go in there. So I'll show you this also has a new radar on this vehicle. It has a twin radar. So it's basically like 2 radars built into one, is what it looks like. So on the PowerPoint, I showed you horizontal and vertical axis, and there was 2 of them, or one each. On this vehicle, there are 2. So as you can see, horizontal, vertical, vertical, and then it'll give me the values. There you go. So the front radar is within specification. I know that gets a little nerdy, but I just want you to understand, you know, what kind of information we can actually see. So questions around that?
No, and for anybody, whether you think you're really good at this stuff or you're just starting out, seriously, go down to the Nissan class. Jake knew that I was going down, and I thought, this will be all right, you know. And there's a lot to it. You learn quite a bit while you're down there. It is a great class to go to. You come back asking more questions than when you left, which is a good thing because it teaches us. But it is a phenomenal class to take.
I wanted to make it hard because, you know, like I said, I told Nissan that I didn't want to teach a class that I hadn't been through myself. And so the instructor, Bill, and I went through it together in Nashville. And this was like during the height of COVID. I mean, we had to sit like 20 feet apart, wrapped up in saran wrap to take this class. But, you know, it was so valuable because, you know, it was one of those things that, you know, it had a real mechanical focus to it. They had us running digital volt and ohm meters and stuff like that. And while that stuff is important, it's not something that we're going to see in collision a lot, you know, unless we've struck a harness or we got a module that's not communicating or something like that. And, you know, and we are going to see a lot of frames that didn't get measured, body structures that didn't get measured, and the radar is pointing a different direction and we can't figure out why. We are going to see glass that's not installed properly or cameras that are not installed properly. We're going to see alignments that didn't get done, you know, those kinds of things. And so we're going to see quarter panels that have been beat out with a hammer and now they're trying to make a radar work again, you know. So that's the kind of stuff that we tried to really put a collision spin on the class and relate it back to things that people on this call are comfortable with. And so, you know, I don't want you to feel like, man, I can't pass this class. We're going to make it really simple for you to where you understand what we're looking for. And then ultimately, you're going to have a better understanding of Nissan Infiniti vehicles, but in vehicles in general, as it relates to ADAS calibration, you're going to know what to look for and how to audit somebody that's doing it for you or audit internally. And that's really kind of the goal of the class. It's just to make us better, you know. So we hope to put something together for their EV platform as well. They currently have the Leaf, but in the summer, they're supposed to launch the Aria, which is an electric crossover. So it's kind of not quite as big as a Rogue, but a little bit smaller and full electric platform. So, you know, the EV stuff is definitely coming.
Hey, Jake, we had a question come in. You think we'll see Aztec do any partnering with Hunter Engineering to help shops with the Hunter alignment racks and targeting with Aztec and kind of some kind of partnership between the two of those?
Yeah, we've been talking to Hunter probably on and off for the last year and a half, 2 years. And so I know that we're working on some solutions on that stuff. The biggest thing is getting OEs to recognize that not every car is going to go to a dealer. And so how do you protect the brand in the aftermarket? You know, how do you approve an aftermarket targeting rig that uses factory targets that incorporates the alignment too? You know, so it's a loaded question. It's something we're working on to try to get that across the finish line.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Well, that is what I have, guys. I don't know if I missed anything, but I sincerely thank everybody for taking their time after a long work day, especially on Monday. So I do appreciate it.
No, thanks. Great presentation as always. Want to remind everyone we have Collision Hub. Jason's going to be here in 2 weeks to talk about metals. I think this was great, Mr. Adams.
Trying to get my screen shared there. Jake, thank you very much. We had a great evening tonight and appreciate you spending your time with us, and lots of great valuable information, and hope to see you again soon, my friend.
All right, guys. You guys have a great night, and if you guys need anything, please reach out.
Again, everybody, thank You have
Have
a
a good
great
evening,
night.
everybody.
See
Take
you
care.
2 weeks from tonight with Collision Hub.